Welcome back, everybody. This is Travis Moore with The Real Method Fitness, and today I've got Serena Musick on here, and we are going to discuss the carnivore diet as always. Serena, if you would, just go ahead and kind of let the audience know a little bit about yourself, a little history.
Okay, so my name is Serena Musick. I live in Virginia with my 4 children, and we homeschool. Our kids have never been to school. Our oldest is 21. We have a 21-year-old, a 19-year-old, 15-year-old, and a 13-year-old. And so far, they're pretty good kids. We'll keep our fingers crossed on that one. But I have been a carnivore. My carniversary, as they say, will actually be in just a few days from when we're recording this. So I'm excited about that. It's probably the longest I've ever really stuck with something that was new without kind of wavering at all. But I really enjoy my food. I enjoy the carnivore diet, and I'm overall just a pretty happy person.
Cool. So what would you say, growing up and stuff, what kind of typical diet did your family kind of introduce at like a young age?
Well, I know that at some point, maybe like when I was in high school, my brother came over, who's 10 years older than me, and he was really mad at my mom because there was like frosted flakes in the cabinet because she would never let him eat those kinds of cereal. So I remember him looking at the cabinet and making a big deal out of the fact that I was allowed to eat that stuff and he wasn't. But for the most part, we were pretty healthy when I was growing up. But it was kind of the beginning of all of that fat-free phase. So I remember times after cheerleading practice and stuff, my friends and I would buy like a fat-free cake, like one of those Entenmann's. Do you remember those Entenmann's cakes? And I remember eating like an entire one and thinking it was okay because it's fat-free. So, that was, early 90s. It was, everybody wanted fat-free stuff. So that was kind of the beginning of that for me. But for the most part, aside from stuff like that, overall, it was a pretty healthy standard American diet, I guess you could call it. Like I said, I have 4 kids, and I remember when all of them were getting to the point where they could they could eat solid food on their own. And I always carried a can of unsalted green beans in the car. And we would be at a red light and they would be hungry, and I would pop that top. I carried a can opener in case I needed it. And I would dump the water out at a stoplight, and I would hand them a can and let them eat their green beans because it was healthy, at the time it was healthy. But it was better than, goldfish or, some of the other things that I could have given them. So for the most part, we would go to theme parks, and I would fill the bottom of the stroller with ice and food for the whole day. I've never been a big fan of eating out. I've always tried to eat pretty healthy. Now that's going, of course, by a standard American diet. So none of the things that I'm going to name go along with carnivore because, you're not supposed to eat all that stuff. So, so it was overall, it was a very healthy standard American diet. In, the last 20 years, we did lots of juicing, lots of juice fasts, lots of fruits and vegetables. We always ate what I thought was a healthy diet.
So yeah, it sounds like you're kind of ahead of the curve already compared to what most people are eating. I know, for instance, I see a lot of people, that's their go-to. It's the goldfish snacks, it's the Cheez-It. If you go to Costco or Sam's, it's the big variety pack that have all the different types of snacks in them. And it's like, here guys, grab these, go run and play. And so what kind of made you decide to start to transition? Was it personal experiences that you were having, or was it things in your family, or?
Well, I think I am probably what would be called a chronic dieter up until now. So, it's started in high school for me with those fat-free treats or the fat-free cakes that I thought I could eat because it didn't matter because it didn't have fat in it. So it started for me years and years ago. And I've done keto over the years. I actually did carnivore one time about 4 years ago, maybe by accident. I didn't know that's what I was doing. A doctor put me on a keto diet, high fat, high protein, very low carb. And I'm kind of an all or nothing person, which goes along with having disordered eating, and things like that. So I'm all or nothing. And when he told me eat very few carbs, I figured none was better than just a few. And I didn't eat any carbs at all for about 8 months. Again, I didn't know what that was at the time. I wish that I had known, and I wish that I had stuck with it then. But over the years, I have done low carb several times. But what brought me to carnivore was I had just done a 5th or 6th stint with Weight Watchers, felt like I was starving. And when I didn't feel like I was starving, I knew what I was eating was filled with artificial stuff. Most things came out of a package at that point because that was easiest because I knew exactly how many points, that's what they use as points.
Mhm.
I knew exactly how many points were in it. I knew exactly how many calories were in all the things I ate. I felt like that was the healthiest plan for me. And it always worked for me in the past. Every time I had had a child and needed to lose some weight, that was what I did. So I had just come from that. After, so we were quarantining, obviously, in 2020, and I put on about 20 pounds, but I was juicing a lot. I thought I was eating really healthy, lots of fruits and vegetables. My inflammation was high. You can look at my Instagram page and see the comparison. You may have seen it in the Carnivore Fix recently, where I did the comparison picture of 2 different Mother's Days, 2 years apart. I was eating a very, very high plant-based, basically diet, very lean meats at the time, juicing a lot. And I thought that I felt good and I thought I was doing the right thing, but I just kept gaining weight during quarantine. So that's when I switched back to Weight Watchers. And I had COVID in December of 2020, and I lost my sense of taste and smell, and it had started to come back gradually. And then in March of last year of 2021, one day I woke up and my husband was making coffee, and I came down the steps and I thought, what is that awful smell? Did the dog get sprayed by a skunk? What is that? And it turns out it's a real thing. It's called parosmia, and it's a lot of people have it after chemotherapy. It's a real thing, and some people get it after they have had COVID, when it's kind of like if you took a big thing of optic wires and they were all connected to each other, and you cut them and then you connected them to the wrong wires. So that's what's happening in my brain. It's
Wow.
confused. So the wires are mixed up, and many, many things smell. The way I could describe it at the time was like a rotten skunk carcass somebody had lit on fire. It was
Wow.
the most awful smell I've ever smelled in my life. And that's what coffee smelled like at the time. I remember just crying. It just seemed so unreal to me. And because we don't know a lot about it, and we don't know whether or not it's going to heal, it's pretty depressing. There are people that are out there that are really, really struggling with it. And I did for a long time. So that went on. There were many, many things. Like we go skating on Wednesdays for homeschool skate. And every time they drop fries at the concession stand, I can smell it. And I always have to have a sweater or a jacket on so I can put it up over my face. And I'll put like essential oils on it or something to cover up the smell of the fries. And it's like that a lot for me when we walk into a restaurant. Sometimes it catches me off guard. Sometimes I forget about it, and we'll be at somebody's house and they'll open an Instant Pot, and I just think I'm going to lose it. Like it just smells so bad. So I'm still dealing with it. But at that point, it was many, many things. And I was barely making it through some days. There were days I ended up in bed all day because the smell of something made me sick. And I was still trying to eat things. I was still trying to be normal and eat things. And the only thing that really tasted and smelled good were sweet things. So my 13 and 15-year-olds have a gluten-free baking business. We've been gluten-free for about 10 years. And they have a gluten-free baking business, and they set up at our local farmers market on the weekends. And at the end, we always have leftover stuff. And I was basically surviving on those things because it was the only thing that I felt like satisfied me, that tasted and smelled good, was sweet stuff with sugar in it. So I was basically living on that last year for about 2.5 months. My birthday's May 22nd. And that weekend, they were making me cupcakes, and I said, double the batch. Because I was medicating myself with sugar, basically.
It's the only thing that tasted good. Yeah.
Yeah. And, when you're depressed or you're sad, that's what people fall to.
Yep.
So that's what I was doing. And I already am a carb addict. I already know that. I know that I have a problem. I know that I can't have just one of something ever. And ever. I've never been able to just have one of something. And I always just kind of laughed about it like it was this joke. But it turns out I do have a problem. I just kind of laughed it off like it was just me. But in any case, so it was my birthday. I asked to double the batch, and I ate 20 cupcakes in 2 days. All I ate, 20 cupcakes. And I went to bed that Sunday night, and I thought, I have to stop. I have to stop this. So I woke up Monday morning and said, that's it. I'm not going to eat any carbohydrates at all anymore, because vegetables and fruits are like the biggest offenders. Garlic, onion, peppermint, those are the things that are the hardest. And it's kind of across the board for everybody with this condition. It's those things for everybody. Popcorn smells awful. So there are a lot of things at the top of that list. And among them are the fruits and vegetables. And so I knew I couldn't eat those. I knew I was giving up sugar. So I just was like, well, what does that make me now? So I started looking it up. Like, what happens if you eat 0 carbs? Is that a possibility? And I found Kelly Hogan, and I was like, So this is a thing. I was doing this 4 years ago, but I didn't know that's what I was doing. This is a thing. So then I found Michaela Peterson and Laura Spath. I found all these people that were doing this, and I was like, okay, so I can do this. I can just eat meat. I couldn't eat cheese at the time. I had to leave the house one time when my kids were making eggs. Like I had to go into our camper for like 2 hours because I couldn't be in the house anymore. So it was basically I could eat a couple of things. I could eat a hamburger and I could eat a steak, but they had to be fresh right off the grill or straight out of the oven. They couldn't be refrigerated and then rewarmed. It's some sort of weird chemical reaction. And so I was very limited on the things that I was eating. And what happened was it changed me. I mean, not only the parosmia, but because I was sad all the time, we would eat, I would make dinner and I would try to take a bite of it and I couldn't eat it, or we would go to a restaurant and I would order something and then the smell of it would make me sick when it got there. And what I realized was I keep trying these things and it's just making me sad. I'm just disappointed every day with what I'm doing. So that was one of the good things about giving up all of those things and saying, I'm only going to eat this. So I figured out how to make it work with the 2 or 3 things I could eat at the time. I couldn't eat bacon, deli meat. So it was very limited. Like we're talking hamburgers and ground beef, and it had to be fresh. I couldn't refrigerate it and reheat it. So I was making new stuff for me every day and feeding everybody else the leftovers from the day before. And what I realized was it made me happier that first of all, the food prep is so simple. I didn't have to worry about chopping things or dicing things or separating things or cooking separate things. The food prep was really easy. But mostly what happened was I wasn't sad anymore because I knew what I could eat. It took all the guesswork out of it. I knew what I could eat. And then I wasn't sad anymore. And I would just say no to other things. And the reason was the parosmia at first. And then later on, as I did research and as I got farther into it, I realized that I am a carb and food addict. And the fact that I can't have just one of anything, I learned the difference between an abstainer and a moderator. And learning that, I think, made the biggest difference to me, because now I know that I'm an abstainer and I know that I can't have just one of something. And knowing that makes me not even try, like so many people. And early on, I would take a bite of this or a bite of that. And I've always done that, bite off my kid's plate or whatever. But knowing that I have to be an abstainer because I can't moderate, really, and I think that's a huge thing for people that fall off the wagon. They say, oh, I had a slice of pizza and then I couldn't stop and it turned into a week or 2 weeks. And that was totally me. So once I learned that I'm an abstainer, I haven't even tasted one thing that wasn't carnivore, because I know that I can't do that. And so acknowledging that made a huge difference for me.
No, that's awesome. That's what I love so much about these interviews, is that people come from all different sorts of backgrounds and struggles. And so far, there hasn't been one person that I haven't found that I haven't related to, because for myself, my health issues, like my struggles were mainly ulcerative colitis was the biggest one. And for the longest time, I thought that it was food related, which I still think so. But
Yeah.
Looking back, I'm a strength and conditioning coach. So being the health guy has always been like my, it's kind of like my ego, you know what I mean? Like people come to me for advice and like, hey man, is this good to eat? Should I, how about this workout? And for the longest time, I had the best advice because it was working for me. But
Right.
It eventually came to a point where my health wasn't, who I was, and it was slipping fast. And people were coming to me for advice, and I felt like a phony because I'm like, I can't even get my own health under control. So how am I going to be able to give these people advice? Because I was giving advice off of what I thought was right at the time. So I didn't have a bad approach to the standard American diet. Like I tried to time all my carbohydrates around my workouts, but at the same time, I relate so heavily with you with the moderation versus the abstinence side of it, because I couldn't eat just a couple Oreos. I had to eat the whole pack of Oreos. I couldn't eat like just a cup of rice. I had to eat all the rice. I had to eat until, for instance, the running joke in my family at the last kid's birthday party was, I don't stop eating birthday cake until I start sweating right here. Like I cannot control it. I just can't. And for the longest time, I got away with it because I carry that same addictive personality into the gym too. I can't work out twice a week. I have to work out 6-7 days a week, which I'm better at now because I realize it's only doing harm to my body and the additional stress is not great. So it's just, like I said, and I relate with you in terms of the Weight Watchers stuff. Like I've watched primarily women struggle with that time and time again, because it's the lean cuisines and it's the slim fasts and it's white chicken breast because you can eat as much of it as you want. And you look back and you're like, man, these people are really only eating like 1,200 calories a day. It's no wonder why they're temporarily losing weight. But in the long run, you know as well as I do, your metabolism down regulates and eventually it starts storing body fat because it's in a starvation state, and it's like, hey, we're not sure we're going to get food again, so we need to hold on to what we're getting.
Yeah, two things. First of all, you mentioned Oreos. Because we're gluten free, they didn't have gluten free Oreos for a long time. Now they do. But even last year, if I was buying Oreos for my family, I would buy 2 packs because I knew that I was going to eat probably a whole pack. And I would go, one of my favorite things in the whole world is that black and white drizzle popcorn from Sam's. They have this giant bag of the popcorn with the chocolate on it. And I would get 2, and I would eat 1 while I was shopping for my family. I would be eating it while I was shopping, and then I would eat it on the way home. When I got home, I would hide that one because I was embarrassed at how much I had eaten, but I literally couldn't stop. And I would take the other one in, and when everybody would open it, I would have some like I hadn't had it yet. And then later, like a few days later, I would get the other bag and take it up so nobody would notice that I had eaten more than half of that giant, month supply of popcorn on my way home from the store. It was bad, and I would joke about it like, oh, it's so funny. I ate 20 cupcakes this weekend, but it's really not funny. And I did have a problem, and I didn't know enough about it to acknowledge it. I think knowledge is power, and we really have to be our own advocates and figure all this stuff out, which brings me to what you just mentioned about not eating enough calories. I will be honest. I have not had a weight loss journey with carnivore. And I think it's important that people know that that is not always the case. People don't always lose a lot of weight very quickly on carnivore. I have coached many women who are stuck, they can't lose any weight, and they're frustrated. And it's not just about weight loss. And of course, I tell them that you are healing, your whole body is healing. I tell people 30, 60 days, don't worry about the weight, just eat. Don't track anything, don't worry about anything. But what happened to me was I got that advice for 8 months. Don't track anything, eat when hungry until full. And I did that. And at the end, I had gained 18 pounds. I had gone up a whole clothing size, which I know a lot of people do. Kelly Hogan did that. Lots of people gain weight in the beginning. Not everybody loses right away. Most people do lose eventually. And I was frustrated. And so one day I decided, and I was fasting a lot too. I would fast like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then eat Saturday and Sunday, and the alternate days during the week. But once I counted my calories and realized what I was eating like on a daily basis, I was only eating about 1,200 calories 4 times a week. So at the end of the week, I was like 6,000 calories or less at the end of the week. And that's why I was gaining, like you said. And so many people say you don't have to count calories with carnivore. And I agree with that in the beginning. But these women that have come to me for help, when I explain to them, I want you to count everything for a week. I want to see what you're eating. Some of these women are eating 600, 700, 800 calories a day. And as soon as they bring their calories up to maintenance level, they lose a little bit. Sometimes they get stuck again. And then you can lower it safely again for a little while until you get stuck. And then what people do is they want to lower it again when they get stuck. But really what you have to do is you have to move it back up. You have to move it back up to your 2,000 or whatever. And people say, well, how do I know how many calories? Everybody says you're not supposed to count calories. And that's true. But I think at some point we have to be rational and say, yes, for most people, but if you're a carb addict or a food addict, like I am, and you don't know what being full feels like anymore because you have spent so much time yo-yo dieting and being hungry, my hunger cues are broken. And so even now at a year in, every now and then I got to count. I got to see what I'm doing because I'll do great for a week. I'll count my calories and say, wow, I'm doing so great. I lost, 4 pounds this week. My body just needed more fat. I'm eating, 3/4 of a stick of butter with, 2 or 3 steaks a day or 6 hamburgers. And I'm doing great. I'm feeling so good. And then I stop counting. And throughout the week, I'll get to like a week later and realize I'm down to 3 hamburgers in a day and 4 tablespoons of butter instead of 8. It's in here. And I don't feel as hungry because of the way I'm eating. And so if I don't keep track of it, I just cause myself more harm than good. And so while I know a lot of people talk about this and I've gone back and forth with people about it, I do think it's important to remember that everybody's not the same. Hunger cues are broken, especially for women that are chronic dieters. And it's really important for them to know that it's okay to check and see what they're eating because so many people are against that. And I feel like it's the stigma that goes along with carnivore because you should be able to eat what you want. No more tracking calories, no more tracking macros. But there are times for people like me where I have to do that because I would have given up. I mean, I would have given up at that 8-month mark probably if somebody hadn't said, and I can't remember who it was now, maybe Katie Kelly, a little bit of fit. It might've been her. But I was just like, you know what? I need to go ahead and track and just see what I mean. Because I keep seeing people say women need more than the 1,200 calories that they think they should eat. And 1,200 is such an arbitrary number. It just seems so silly that that's the target all the time. but I counted and I was shocked. It was like 11 or 1200 calories. And I would have quit if I hadn't done that. I would have thought carnivore is not for me. And so rather than have people quit because they're frustrated, I want them to count, check and see what they're eating, and then let's talk about it. Because it's very frustrating to be in the position that I was in. And I'm still in that position. I am still fixing my damaged metabolism from years and years, but at least I know there have been days where I'm up to almost 3,000 calories. And you know what? I don't gain an ounce. And then the days where, like I'm experimenting and I eat 1,500, I don't lose an ounce. Like I can do 1,500 for a week and the scale stays the same. And I can do 3,000 for a week and the scale stays the same. So that means my body is still healing. But I think you have to know, if you know better, you do better. So I think we have to pay attention and know what's going on. Otherwise, we're just setting ourselves up for failure.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you hear it time and time again, eat until comfortably full, eat until comfortably full. And I see the same thing, especially people transitioning from a standard American diet. It's so much harder to eat 800 calories of ground beef or a ribeye steak than it is of Oreos, like we were saying. So
that's exactly right.
Somebody might feel like they're getting full after, I don't know, let's say half the steak, right? And then they're like, okay, I'm full, I'm done. But like you said, if they're not tracking that, and certainly if they're implementing fasting 1, 2, 3 days a week, that total average for the week for calories can plummet in a heartbeat. And that's the best thing you can do to downregulate your metabolism is to undereat just like that. So
yeah. And what I was doing was I would break my fast at like noon, and I would eat a fairly large meal between like noon and 1, have a little, something extra. And I was like stuffed. And then dinner time rolls around and I'm like, well, I'm not really that hungry anyway. So I'm just going to go ahead and carry this over into my fast for tomorrow. And then I fast the next day. And then the third day I do the same thing. Noon, 1 o'clock, I break my fast, I eat a bunch. And then I'm like at dinner time, well, I'm not really hungry. I'm going to carry this over. So I was basically eating one small meal every other day. And then the same thing, both weekend days. And I just damaged my metabolism by doing that. But I was eating until I was full, and I was eating when I was hungry. And at dinner time, when I wasn't very hungry, I let it go because fasting is good for you. And it is. Not if you're not eating. You really got to be sure if you're doing just OMAD and you're fasting every other day or something, you really got to be sure that you are getting enough calories in that meal. So many people will say, well, I've tried eating more and I just gained weight. I can only eat 1,000 calories a day. I have to eat 800 if I want to lose. But if you would fix your metabolism, and it might take several months, if you would fix your metabolism, and you can do that without gaining weight, if you'll fix it, I would rather stay the same at 3,000 calories a day than at 1,200. And people will say, oh, I can't eat that much. But wouldn't you be happier? I'm so much happier at 3,000 calories than I was at 1,200. Like, why would you eat that little if you don't have to?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another topic of discussion that, especially for people like myself that were coming from severe gut dysbiosis and harm to my colon for 5 years straight, like people were promoting eat till comfortably full, but also you only have to eat once a day. And I was like, oh man, this is going to be great. I'll get the benefits of fasting, like you were saying. We'll get that cell turnover. I'll crush all my food in one meal and I'll feel great. So I tried that for like the first couple of days, right? And I've been pretty consistent throughout my entirety of my weightlifting career, all that kind of stuff of tracking what I normally eat. So I've got a really good basis of what my basal metabolic rate is and what I need to eat to stay at maintenance and hold weight and stuff like that. So I was sitting down trying to eat like 3,400 calories or more in one sitting. And I was finding myself extremely nauseous. I was getting the sweats. I'd have to go lay down. And I'm like, how are people doing this? And I keep hearing people, yeah, I eat a 2-pound ribeye, no problem. I'm ready to eat again in 2 hours. And I'm like, I can't. So I'm still eating 3 times a day just to get my amount of calories that I need. So that eating window is not, I wouldn't say I start my first meal at 8 and end my last one at 8 at night, but it's a shortened window, but I have to split that up. And I do play with like my macronutrients and stuff like that, like higher fat versus higher protein. And I did notice when I first started, I could not handle the fat. I just never ate that much fat. Even on a high calorie, high carb diet, I was maybe consistently eating 90 to 100 grams tops. So when I transitioned and was trying to consume 200 to 300 grams of fat, I was having terrible like bowel movements, experience just as an overall was just not great. So I had to switch to like a 65-35 ratio for fat to protein. And then finally I started to have, normal movements. And then now that I've been on it longer, I'm able to tolerate more fat. And so now I'm more of a true, I guess, ketovore or carnivore ratio,
Yeah.
which is like a 75-25. And I'm able to tolerate that really well. And I do notice that I'm starting to be able to tolerate more food in one sitting, and my body's more hungry in
Yeah.
one sitting. Like I can eat, 1,400 calories and feel like maybe I could eat a little bit more, but I'm not quite pushing it just yet because I'm like, I want there to be just a little bit of hunger there so that for my next
Right.
meal, I'm ready for it. And
Yeah.
I think you're right. It's a very individual process, and there's certainly not a one size fits all in this, but a calorie base is a great starting point. So
Yeah. And I think in the beginning, people should just eat. They should just nourish their bodies. They should eat as much. Like for me, a lot of those foods were off limits for so many years. The bacon, the thick cut bacon, chicken wings. Chicken wings is one of my things. I actually made chicken wings today. Chicken wings is one of those things that was so off limits for me for so many years. It's kind of one of those things that I crave very often.
mm,
It's the crunch. It's the, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I love some buffalo wings. And so I think some people need what I needed at the beginning, which was eat as much bacon as you want, eat as many chicken wings as you want, eat as much butter as you want, fry your eggs in butter. I think people need to know that that's okay and don't really need to count at the beginning. It's later on, like a month in or 45 days or 60 days in, where you feel really great and you have energy, but you're hearing people talk about this endless energy that they have, and you're not feeling that yet. And you're not losing any weight at all, which probably means your body isn't burning your body fat. So are you eating too much protein? Are you not eating enough fat? Are you under eating? I think there are a lot of different variables, and not everybody has a problem. Not everybody has to check and see what they're eating. But like for me and for a lot of women, and I've heard lots of men say it too, they really do need to check every now and then because it's so easy to undereat on the carnivore diet. It really is super easy. I actually only ate one really big meal today, and I'm feeling guilty about it because, it's 7 o'clock. I'm not going to eat now. I was busy. I wasn't really hungry when we got home, and I'm not going to eat now, but I probably am pretty under today.
mhm.
And so I have to rationalize that, like, well, but I've been eating a lot for several days, and one day probably isn't going to hurt me. But I try to be pretty cautious about it because I do want to, um, acknowledge that in myself that I have that problem of undereating. And so many people are probably like, oh, I wish I had the problem of undereating. But the truth is, a lot of people do. And maybe you didn't with a standard American diet, but you might now. So I just think that's a really important point, is to make sure people know that that advice is good. Fasting is great. Being able to just eat whenever and whatever you want is really great. But for some people, they're going to have to go back and tweak things. And I think that's really not talked about enough.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't, people, when they can eat whatever they want when they first get started, it's good advice because these are, although they taste great, they're not as highly palatable as some of these other foods, right? So your body's going to tell you your stopping point. It's not going to let you continue to just binge on
Right.
fat or binge
That's
on
right.
protein. You're going to have a signal, much like myself, where I was getting really nauseous. I was getting the
Right.
sweats. It's like, okay, obviously this isn't how much I need at one sitting. So
Right. You got to spread it out sometimes.
yeah. What would you say some of your major improvements have been since implementing carnivore? I know you said that your carniversary is coming up here shortly. So
Yeah.
why don't you just go over some of the best things that you've experienced since implementing it, outside of the cravings and stuff that we've already discussed? What are some other topics that you'd like to mention?
Well, I think the carb addiction thing. I know we talked about cravings, but the carb addiction thing, for somebody who has for years been preoccupied by food and eaten a dozen cupcakes at every possible opportunity and a whole bag of sugary popcorn, and I did that on a regular basis, and then I would punish myself by restricting. It affected my life. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times we went somewhere and I would be panicked about what I was going to get. I would be looking up restaurants on the way to the restaurant, looking at their menus, trying to decide, taking my own food places because I wasn't going to eat a hamburger. If we went to somebody's house for a cookout, I knew I wasn't going to eat the hamburger or the steak probably, and I was going to be hungry. If I ate it, it was going to be little tiny, and I was going to need something else. And what if they didn't have vegetables for me? And what if they didn't have fruit so I could have something better than the meat? And so for years that was, I was very preoccupied with food all the time. I also had some anxiety. I had some dry skin patches. I had like a patch like between my fingers, like a patch of eczema that would last for 2 years when it would become inflamed. And I would wake up in the middle of the night scratching it. And in the morning it would be, it would be bleeding because I had scratched it in the middle of the night. The biggest thing for me was the food, the carb thing and the binge eating. I would binge on those kinds of sweet things. But it's funny because It didn't have to be sweet things for me necessarily. If I bought one of those giant bags of already cut up kale and sauteed it for my family for dinner with coconut oil and some salt, if I took a little bit of that, like with my fingers while I was cooking it, it would set off something in my head. I don't know if it was the fat and the sugar or the kale itself, but I would literally eat an entire pan. And so when I bought that, I learned that I was going to have to buy two. But there were times I had to make a separate side for my family because I had eaten all the kale. And you want to talk about feeling sick and
Wow.
bloated and miserable. And my friends would say, well, I've never known anybody feel bad for eating too much kale, but I did because I was miserable over it. But I kept doing it over and over. There was something about that combination. So it didn't have to be sweets for me. The majority of the time that it was sweets, but I think salt was a little bit of a trigger for me too. But it was mostly sugar. And so I think honestly, I know we've already talked about it, but that is the biggest thing for me is that food addiction, that carb addiction, and eliminating those things entirely saved me. I mean, it changed my life taking those things out. And I see people all the time saying, oh, I slipped, I'm such a failure, and you just pick up and start back over. But the key is to not be that person anymore. And that's what becoming a carnivore did for me. And knowing the difference between an abstainer and a moderator, I am not that person anymore. I do not. I mean, it's been at Christmas time, I had a few things. So it's been 5.5 months since I've had even one thing that was not a carnivore food. And it's because I made that decision that I'm not that person anymore. I learned my lesson at Christmas. I probably had something that wasn't carnivore 5 times in the last year. And at Christmas, it was maybe a 2-day thing, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day with my family. I ate a little bit of sugar. My mother-in-law makes delicious gluten-free rolls, and she makes those specifically for me and my daughter. So I had one of those because I felt guilty because she had made them for me. And, I felt like I had to have at least one. But I learned my lesson, and it's been since then, since I have had anything at all. And I saw somebody say that you just have to try not to be that person anymore, saying, I'm trying not to eat carbs, or I'm trying not to do this, or I'm trying not to do that. You have to say, I'm not doing that. And I think that's made a difference for me too, is saying that I am not that person anymore. I do not eat those foods. And I think that's helped me a lot. And when we go places, people always have a hamburger or a steak, or it's always like a grilling out thing. And if I have any control over it, if people say, what should we eat? I say, let's have hamburgers, or, I try to kind of dictate it that way. And if it's not going that way, I will just make sure that I bring foods that I know I can eat. Like for Christmas, I took Kelly Hogan's meat and cheese casserole to my in-laws' house, and everybody loved it. And I just ate that. And then I also brought an unsweetened cheesecake, and I just had that for dessert, So I try to make sure that the items that I bring, and nobody ever notices. People always say, well, I don't want to be rude and not eat their food, but nobody is going to notice what you put on their plate. And if they do, you can just say, I'm just going to have this. We are so self-conscious about what other people are going to think. But the meat and cheese casserole and the cheesecake, I mean, sure, it was a lot of cheese, and I don't usually eat that much cheese, but it got me through, and everybody loved it, and nobody questioned why I wasn't eating the other food, So I think the key is to just be ready, know what you're having, and make sure you bring something. For me, that has made a huge difference. So I am not the person anymore that's going to eat what's there just because it's there and that's the only thing. I just try to kind of try to dictate it so that I know that there will be something that I can have.
Yeah, I've noticed the same thing. I have no shame in bringing my own food somewhere. I'm like, and if someone does ask, I'm like, it's just what I enjoy. Like that's all it is. And
Yeah.
and that's just how I go about it. I used to, when I was, I guess I'd say maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, I wasn't carnivore at the time, but I still always packed my meals just because I was so into the fitness stuff. I was into bodybuilding shows, and so I always had my own Tupperware and stuff. So I guess I may have got used to it then, but it's like you said, a lot of times the foods that we're bringing too, if you make like let's say you're going to a brunch or something and you make a egg casserole with hamburger meat and cheese in it, like who's not going to love that,
Right. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
I think, like you said, it's just our own self-conscious ways that kind of prevent us from being successful sometime. And I think, like you said, being honest with yourself and admitting, if I don't do this, I'm going to be that old self. So I need to do
That's right.
this.
That's right.
And typically anybody that doesn't support you in that aspect probably doesn't have the best interest for you anyway. So
Right. Exactly.
how about physical performance? I noticed in your bio there, you said that you guys like to go on trails and stuff like that for
Yeah.
running. How about physical performance
Mhm.
side of things?
I definitely am stronger than I was, and when I was running, like going out and doing a 3 or 4 or 5 mile run, My endurance was really great. I felt really good, but recently I decided to kind of cut back. Maybe my cortisol is high or something. I'm just trying to tweak things. I gave up coffee recently because I figure I need to be 100% so that I know that I'm putting it all in. Like I can't complain about the results I'm not getting from the work I'm not putting in. And so that means for me being 100%. So I can say, well, it's not the coffee that's holding me back. It's not the spices that are holding me back. Maybe it's the cheese that's holding me back a little bit, but I have given up cheese multiple times for months at a time. But anyway, I do feel like I have more energy, and I do feel like I can lift heavier weights, and I feel like my gains happen faster. But recently I quit running the 3 and 4 miles. And when we go, I walk for about 1.5 miles. And then after I turn around and come back, I do sprints for about 30 seconds. And then I walk for a minute, and then I sprint for 30 seconds. And then I walk for a minute, trying to get some more interval training in for more fat loss. And so far I feel really good. We did that this morning and I felt really good at the end. I don't really feel like I'm, cheating myself by not getting that steady state cardio. I know that is hard on cortisol, especially for women. And so I have given that up recently too, which is hard. It's a little bit hard. I go running with my husband, so he's running a lot farther than I am, but I have to just look at it like, we're still going together. This is something that I'm doing for me and to try to help my body. And not everybody has a problem with steady state cardio. A lot of people are doing great and doing steady state cardio, but I really need to focus on lifting weights and doing some sprinting right now so that I can get the changes that I want to see.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because I've kind of noticed the same thing. I went through a stint where I trained for a half marathon and completed my first half marathon back in February and got really into long distance running. And I've noticed multiple factors in a sense that it was very muscle wasting for me. So a lot of muscle that I had accrued over time seemed like it dissipated really fast, especially in my upper body. And also I noticed I was getting kind of like what people call skinny fat. And I was actually listening to a discussion today on Judy Cho's Nutrition with Judy. And she was discussing, I can't recall off the top of my head the gentleman's name, but they were talking about visceral fat, which is essentially the fat that surrounds your organs. It can be your kidneys, or any organ really. And they noticed that in long distance runners that their visceral fat was actually pretty high. Like it didn't matter if they were thin, their fat, which is most dangerous, which is the one that surrounds your organs, was actually quite high. And it's interesting that you said that you started sprinting, because they said that the number one thing that helped prevent that was sprinting. So obviously high intensity interval training like that can reduce that. So I think that's
and I've run for 25 years, probably maybe a little bit more than that. I don't like running. I don't enjoy it at all. I despise running. I've done 2 marathons, a few half marathons, more 5Ks, than I could probably list. So I've been a runner for a long time, but I've never enjoyed it. So this is actually kind of nice for me to not have to go out there. I despise every step when I run. Seriously, like every step I'm thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? I don't like this. I don't like it. I just dread the whole thing. But the sprinting is a lot easier. So I find a good book or a podcast. I actually saved the one you're talking about to listen to while I'm running, but I haven't listened to it yet. But I will, maybe I'll listen to it tomorrow. But it goes by faster for me. It's just easier for me to do that than it is for me to keep running. And if it's going to be better for fat loss and better for my cortisol level, then I am all for it.
Yeah, I think you're only going to like affirm, what your suspicions probably had.
Yeah.
That your cortisol was probably high and that was just your body's feedback. But what would you say to somebody that was maybe on the fence about carnivore? Maybe somebody that's dabbled a little bit, that hasn't really seen results, and maybe they're carnivore for a couple of days a week, but then they go back to the regular diet and then they try to blame that carnivore didn't work for them. What would be your advice to them?
I would say you're wasting the 2 days a week by doing carnivore and then not continuing. And then on the other hand, you're wasting the 5 days a week that you could be carnivore on top of your other 2 days. So I would say for people that do it for 2 or 3 days or even a week, you are not getting the full benefit of carnivore because it takes so long for your body to switch over. A lot of people don't understand that if you give your body carbohydrates, your body burns the carbohydrates first. So the reason that we have those dips in the afternoon when our breakfast starts to wear off is it's our blood sugar, and we start to get tired because we don't have any carbohydrates because our body is running on carbohydrates. So you give it this high with cereal or a bagel or waffles or whatever for breakfast. And then it starts to go down around lunchtime and you're going, man, I got to eat. Like people get hangry, it's because their blood sugar is going down. You're not feeling so good. You feel like you could take a nap. And then you give it another hit you give it some more drugs, you give it some more sugar, you give it some more carbohydrates, and it comes back up. And then around dinner time, the same thing happens. And so as long as you continue to feed it those carbohydrates, but once you give your body a chance, your body and your brain a chance to switch over to fat burning mode, you're going to find that that energy, it just is all day long. Your level just stays the same because you're not giving your body that glucose and those carbohydrates that gives it that high, and then you have that low. So that's not going to happen anymore. And I think you have to give your body that chance. So I always tell people you have to give it at least 30 days. And sometimes that's not long enough for people with, they're insulin resistant, or people that are cheating a little bit, or people that are still having, let's say, milk or half and half in their coffee instead of heavy cream. Like those little things that aren't carnivore start to add up. And so I feel like if you're not giving it 100% for 30 days, and I'm not saying you have to give up coffee. I did that recently because I felt like it was time for me. I'd been carnivore for 10 months at the time. And I felt like I needed that extra. You don't have to give up dairy. Not everybody has to give up dairy. I have had to do that a few times because of inflammation, but not everybody has to do that. So I think those little cheats add up. The artificial sweetener in your coffee, the, maybe some sort of simple syrup that doesn't have any, you think it doesn't have any carbs in it, but it does. It has hidden carbs, and it spikes your sugar, your glucose level, and your body thinks sugar is coming. So it has the same response as sugar. And so I think for people who are doing those little things, eating a couple of French fries or a couple of chips off their children's plates or a couple of goldfish or a few grapes here and there, those people are never going to see the really great benefits from it. So if you're doing that for 30 days, that is not carnivore, and you are not going to see any benefits, and you're going to quit. But if you can say to yourself, 30 days, find an accountability partner, go into the Facebook groups. Carnivore Fix has some great people in it that can help with that. If you just ask, you make a post and say, I need an accountability buddy. I need somebody that I can text every day that I can be accountable to. And people will raise their hands. People will say, you can absolutely text me, because that made a huge difference for me in the beginning to know that I had, and I made friends with people on Instagram and Facebook in these groups so that I knew that I had somebody that I could say, hey, I'm struggling today. So I think for people to give it 30 days, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be totally worth it at the end. And chances are you're not going back. And so I think an accountability partner is huge, and you have to give up all of those things that are carbohydrates. You just have to do that for 30 days so you can give your body and your brain a chance to adjust. And I think it'll be totally worth it in the long run.
I totally agree. I think 30 days is a great starting point, and to have that accountability partner for somebody, especially that's coming from a carb addiction standpoint.
Yeah.
It sounds silly to make this analogy, but it's almost like having a sponsor. Really, it is. It's like
Yes,
having
I
that
agree.
person that you can text. It's like, hey, I'm struggling
Yeah.
today. I really
Yeah.
want to eat a cookie, or bread or pasta or whatever your
Yeah.
vice is. Like, you and I both have had those vices, and we know what it's like to have to feel that way. So having that person that you can text, and then just somebody to tell you, hey, like, it won't be worth it. We're going to be restarting this whole process over. Just give it the 30 days. And speaking from personal experience, my transition was actually a lot longer than 30 days. Mine actually took closer to like 2 months, because I told you in the beginning, I couldn't tolerate high fat meals. And so I had to start with a higher protein. And I think I was beyond my protein threshold. And I was still converting some of that over into glucose. And I think my body was still kind of like, it had just enough glucose, but at the same time, it was not a
Yeah.
sufficient fuel source. So I would go in the gym and
Right.
do a couple sets of like an exercise and be wiped out, like just no
Mhm.
energy. I was getting super tired in the afternoons, yawning, like, I'm not supposed to be feeling this way. And as of
Right.
more recently, as I've been able to adjust those macronutrients and become more fat based, 75-25, as opposed to before I was like 65-35. Today I felt great, and just the last few weeks I felt great. I've had that solid baseline of energy like we've talked
Yeah.
about. And so it's much better now than it was. But I totally agree with you that somebody needs to block out an amount of time, 30 days
Yeah.
minimum for most people. And if you do it for 30 days and you just totally decide you hate it and it's not for you, it was 30 days out of a lifetime. Like, is that
Right.
really a big deal
Exactly.
for food? So
Right. And you didn't do any damage at all in 30 days. If anything, you helped your body. Even if you didn't like it, you probably helped your body.
exactly, we'll just consider it an
Yeah.
insulin reset, right? I mean,
Right.
insulin
Exactly.
insulin sensitivity reset, because those insulin
Right.
receptors are wore down from people slamming carbohydrates every day, all
Yeah.
day. And so at the least, your body could use that reset. So
Yeah. I agree.
Kind of our final question here, unless you've got anything else that you'd like to breeze over. I like to ask everybody kind of at the end of the interview, what is your favorite carnivore meal if you had to pick one?
I should have been ready for this. I have so many. I mean, that's the thing
It's
is
a
I have
hard
so
question.
many.
Yeah.
Do I really have to pick just one?
All right. We'll give you
Mm,
you can do top three if you can pick three.
okay. Chicken wings. I've already made that clear.
I
That's
think
a
it's
huge
a,
one.
I think it's the skin on them. The skin's what gets me. I love a crispy
Yeah.
skin.
Yeah. Did you know you can order chicken skins from your local butcher and you can air fry them and they turn into chips?
I didn't know that. I'll have to check with my butcher
Best
because
thing.
they do have chicken
Yeah.
wings up there. I've never considered asking them that though.
Yeah, my butcher had to order it. He had to order like a 40-pound block, and I was like, I don't have room for 40 pounds. He said, I'll keep it here. You tell me when you want some, and I'll cut them off in 1-pound chunks. And so he's actually got a saw in his freezer, and I have watched him when I tell him I'm here and I want some chicken skins. He goes in, it's like, and he cuts off this like brick of chicken skins. And once they thaw, you can pull them apart, and
Yeah.
you can bake them. They're absolutely wonderful. But anyway, so chicken wings. I'd have to say ribeye, of course, because come on. And then good old fashioned cheeseburger, bacon cheeseburger.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You can't leave the bacon off there.
I mean, you can't go wrong with a cheeseburger. Who wouldn't love to eat 4 or 5 cheeseburgers in a day and not feel guilty about it? Like on the standard American diet, that's sending you to a heart attack. But it's not the bread. I mean, it's not the meat, it's the bread. It's all the stuff you put on it. It is not the hamburger itself. And people are so confused about that. So yeah, I mean, you can't beat a bacon cheeseburger.
Yeah, the first thing I tell people when they're like, they can't comprehend how just removing the bun can have such an impact on your metabolic health as just opposed to eating just the patty or with the cheese and I immediately have people just go research the Randall cycle, and I'm like, you'll have a little more understanding after you listen to this or read this but it's so hard for people to comprehend. So
yeah, it really is. It's hard for people to understand that a cheeseburger can be healthy in any way, shape, or form. But like, who doesn't want to eat a bunch of cheeseburgers and not feel bad about it? And it actually tastes better. It tastes 100 times better without the bun and all the garbage on it. I mean, but you have to, but it's not going to taste that way at first. You have to adjust your taste buds, and it takes about a week for that of not eating any of that stuff. And suddenly your food tastes so good when you remove all the garbage. You can taste the real food, and it is so much better.
yeah, it's so satiating, and it's just a little bit of salt, and I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Well, Serena, I really appreciate you hopping on here and taking the time to interview with me. I think sharing stories like this for people who aren't up to date with the research and the science and stuff behind all this, I think just sharing stories of healing is really the best way. Sharing testimonies, and like you said, Kelly Hogan being an influence on your life. I love listening to her stuff. She's honest. She's not out there trying to convince anybody. She just says, hey, I don't know all the science, but I feel better. And all these people that know the science, I'm going to talk to them and let them discuss it. So I think it's a great way to get the word out there.
Yeah, and I think sharing our stories is what helps other people and makes other people feel better. So I think anybody who has a story or has had an experience should absolutely share it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, thanks again for hopping on. If people want to find you also, is there anywhere they can find you? Facebook, Instagram, anything like that?
Yeah. My name across the board is the same. It's Serena.carnivore. And I'm on Instagram. Facebook is, just shares my Instagram stuff. So Instagram is probably better. And then on YouTube and TikTok also. I don't have a lot of my own stuff out there, but I'm working on it.
Okay, cool. I will. I need to get on the TikTok train. Back when it was first kind of becoming popular, I had it for a little while, but I found myself just scrolling, and now I use social media as just a tool as opposed to just mindless scrolling. So maybe I need to get it back out as a tool instead of now that I'm more well equipped. But anyway, I will make sure that I link your Instagram and Facebook profile at the bottom of this YouTube video. Okay. And anybody that has any questions about carb addiction or food addiction in general, feel free to reach out to Serena. She's obviously been through it and worked her way through it, and she sounds like she'd be a great person to reach out to. So
thanks.
All right.